In the blood-soaked streets of revolutionary Paris, where the guillotine's blade fell daily and mercy had become a forgotten virtue, one execution stands apart, not for its method, but for its unspeakable brutality. The death of Princess Marie Louise de Savoie-Carignan, known as the Princesse de Lamballe, arguably represents the most savage act of mob violence in an era defined by unprecedented cruelty. What happened to this gentle noblewoman on September 3, 1792, would shock even the hardened revolutionaries who witnessed it, etching itself into the annals of history as a testament to the terrifying power of unchecked rage. The Princesse de Lamballe was no ordinary victim of revolutionary justice. She was the closest confidante of Marie Antoinette, a woman whose unwavering loyalty would ultimately cost her everything. Born into privilege, yet marked by personal tragedy, she had dedicated her life to serving the French crown with unwavering devotion. Her story is a poignant narrative of friendship, sacrifice, and a loyalty so absolute that she chose death over betrayal, a decision that led to one of history's most horrifying public executions. It is a stark reminder of the fragility of civility in the face of revolutionary fervor. To truly grasp the horror that befell the Princesse de Lamballe, we must journey back to the turbulent days of 1792, when France had descended into revolutionary madness, and the mob's thirst for aristocratic blood seemed unquenchable. This is not merely a chronicle of political upheaval, but a chilling exploration of how quickly civilization can unravel into barbarism, and how the noblest of human qualities, loyalty and friendship, can become death sentences in times of chaos. The events surrounding her death lay bare not only the brutality of revolutionary France, but also the depths to which human nature can sink when fear, hatred, and mob mentality take hold. What you are about to discover concerning Princesse de Lamballe's final hours will challenge your perceptions of the French Revolution's capacity for cruelty. Her execution was far more than a simple killing. It was a calculated act of psychological warfare, a deliberate attempt to shatter the spirit of the imprisoned royal family. The revolutionaries understood that by torturing and mutilating Marie Antoinette's dearest friend, they could inflict a wound upon the queen far deeper than any physical harm. This was cruelty weaponized, friendship turned into a devastating vulnerability. Marie Louise de Savoie-Carignan was born on September 8, 1749, into the illustrious House of Savoy, one of Europe's oldest and most prestigious royal families. Her early life was a tapestry woven with threads of both privilege and profound loss, experiences that would mold her into the devoted and ultimately tragic figure she was destined to become. At the tender age of 17, she entered into an arranged marriage with Louis Alexandre de Bourbon, Prince de Lamballe, the heir to one of France's wealthiest noble families and a cousin to King Louis XIV. The marriage, typical of aristocratic unions during this era, was more a strategic political alliance than a blossoming love match. The young Prince de Lamballe was notorious for his dissolute lifestyle, marked by gambling and countless affairs, hardly the ideal partner for the sensitive and devout Marie Thurs. Their union was tragically short-lived, lasting barely a year before tragedy struck in May 1768. The prince died suddenly, likely from syphilis contracted through his promiscuous behavior, leaving his 18-year-old widow utterly devastated and profoundly alone. Rather than succumb to despair or seek solace in another marriage, the newly widowed Princesse de Lamballe made a conscious decision to dedicate her life to service and friendship. Her grief had seemingly transformed her into a deeply compassionate woman who sought meaning through helping others. It was this profound empathy that would soon draw her into the orbit of another young woman grappling with the immense pressures of royal life, Marie Antoinette, the Austrian-born Dauphine who had recently arrived at the opulent court of Versailles. The friendship that blossomed between Marie Antoinette and the Princesse de Lamballe was genuine and profound, rooted in shared experiences of loss, displacement, and the suffocating expectations of courtly existence. Marie Antoinette, homesick and struggling to adapt to the intricate customs of the French court, found in the princess a kindred spirit, someone who truly understood the profound loneliness that could exist even amidst the grandeur of the palace. The princess, in turn, discovered a renewed sense of purpose in providing the unwavering emotional support and loyalty that the future queen so desperately needed. When Marie Antoinette ascended to the throne in 1774, she created the esteemed position of superintendent of the household specifically for her cherished friend, a role that came with considerable influence and a generous annual salary of 150,000 livres. This appointment would prove to be a double-edged sword, elevating the princess to a position of unprecedented power for a woman at court, while simultaneously making her a prime target for those who resented the queen's Austrian origins and perceived extravagances. The early years of Marie Antoinette's reign were plagued by mounting criticism of the royal family's lavish spending and lifestyle, criticism that inevitably extended to the queen's inner circle. The Princesse de Lamballe, as the queen's most visible companion and confidant, became a lightning rod for public resentment, unfairly burdened with the sins, real or imagined, of the monarchy. Scurrilous pamphlets and broadsheets began to circulate, portraying her as a corrupting influence who encouraged the queen's supposed excesses and foreign sympathies. Despite the escalating hostility directed toward the royal family and their associates, the Princesse de Lamballe never faltered in her unwavering loyalty. She fully understood that her elevated position made her vulnerable, but she also recognized that Marie Antoinette desperately needed her friendship and support as the political climate deteriorated. The princess had witnessed firsthand the queen's struggles with motherhood, her husband's initial coldness, and the relentless barrage of criticism leveled at her from both the court and the public. The princess's devotion transcended mere friendship, encompassing a deeply held belief in the divine right of monarchy and the importance of preserving tradition in an increasingly chaotic world. She viewed herself as a guardian not just of the queen's emotional well-being, but of the very institution of monarchy itself. This unwavering sense of duty would remain unshakable even as the ominous storm clouds of revolution gathered on the horizon. As the 1780s unfolded and France's financial crisis deepened, the political atmosphere became increasingly toxic. The princess watched with growing alarm as pamphlets became ever more vicious, as crowds grew increasingly hostile, and as even moderate voices began calling for radical changes to the monarchy. Yet, through it all, she remained steadfast in her support for Marie Antoinette, becoming a pillar of strength during the queen's darkest hours. The bond between the two women had evolved beyond mere companionship into something akin to sisterhood. They shared everything: their innermost hopes, deepest fears, closely guarded secrets, and profound sorrows. The princess had been present for the births of the royal children and had served as a surrogate mother figure when official duties kept the queen occupied. This profound emotional bond would ultimately seal the princess's tragic fate, for in the minds of the revolutionaries, her unwavering loyalty to Marie Antoinette made her equally guilty of perceived crimes against the people. The French Revolution erupted in 1789, a cataclysmic event that unleashed forces previously unimaginable. Years of crippling financial crisis, vast social inequality, and profound political incompetence had created a volatile environment ripe for revolution, one that would ultimately sweep away not just the monarchy, but also much of the established aristocratic order. For the Princesse de Lamballe, who had spent her entire adult life within the protective bubble of Versailles, the revolution represented an existential threat to everything she held sacred. The early days of the revolution were characterized by a cautious optimism among some moderates, a belief that meaningful reforms could be achieved without completely dismantling the monarchy. The princess, along with many within the royal circle, initially hoped that concessions and compromises might appease the revolutionaries' demands while preserving the essential structure of royal authority. This hope, however, would prove tragically naive as events spiraled rapidly beyond anyone's control. By 1791, the political landscape had irrevocably shifted. The royal family's ill-fated attempt to flee to Varennes had been thwarted, and public opinion had turned decisively against the monarchy. The Princesse de Lamballe found herself in an increasingly precarious position as her close association with Marie Antoinette made her a prime target for revolutionary justice. Friends and trusted advisors implored her to flee France while she still had the opportunity to seek refuge in the courts of Europe, where her noble birth would be a source of protection rather than a liability. The princess faced an agonizing dilemma that would ultimately define her legacy. She could abandon her friend and flee to safety, preserving her own life but betraying the deepest bond she had ever known. Or she could remain steadfastly loyal to Marie Antoinette, fully aware that such loyalty might cost her everything. For a woman who had always defined herself through service and devotion, the choice, in reality, was no choice at all. She would stand resolutely by her friend, regardless of the consequences. The momentous decision to remain in France was not one made lightly or impulsively. The princess understood the grave risks involved better than most, having witnessed the revolutionary crowd's capacity for unbridled violence and having read the increasingly venomous attacks on the royal family in the revolutionary press. She was acutely aware that her name appeared regularly on lists of enemies of the people, and that several of her noble friends had already been brutally murdered by revolutionary mobs. Yet, the princess's unwavering sense of honor and duty ran far deeper than her palpable fear of death. She had made sacred vows of loyalty to her queen and friend, and she firmly believed that abandoning Marie Antoinette in her hour of greatest need would constitute a profound betrayal of everything she held dear. Moreover, she recognized that her very presence provided crucial emotional support to the queen, who was struggling immensely with the imprisonment of her family and the devastating collapse of the world she had always known. The princess's unwavering decision was also deeply influenced by her profound religious faith, which taught her that earthly suffering was transient, while honor and duty were eternal. She firmly believed that God would protect her if it was His will, and that if death was to be her ultimate fate, then dying for loyalty and friendship would be a noble and righteous end. This deeply held spiritual conviction provided her with the remarkable strength to face the approaching storm with extraordinary courage and unwavering dignity. As 1792 dawned, the princess could clearly see that the situation was rapidly becoming untenable. The royal family had been forcibly transferred from the opulent Palace of Versailles to the Tuileries Palace in Paris, where they lived under virtual house arrest, their every move scrutinized. Revolutionary sentiment was reaching a fever pitch, and the increasingly strident calls for the complete abolition of the monarchy grew louder with each passing day. The princess knew that time was rapidly running out, but still, she steadfastly refused to abandon her post, clinging to the hope that somehow she could still offer solace and support to her beleaguered queen. The declaration of war that France had made against Austria and Prussia in April 1792 only served to further intensify the revolutionary fervor and heightened suspicion of anyone with aristocratic connections. The princess, with her foreign birth and close ties to the royal family, was perceived as a potential traitor, someone who might be secretly colluding with France's enemies. A torrent of unfounded rumors and baseless accusations swirled around her, painting her as everything from a spy to a corrupting influence on the queen, all of which made her already precarious position increasingly dangerous. By the summer of 1792, the Princesse de Lamballe's fate was, in essence, sealed, though she may not have fully grasped the full extent of her peril at the time. The radical Jacobins had seized control of the revolutionary government, and their rhetoric had become increasingly violent and uncompromising toward all perceived enemies of the Republic. The very concept of mercy or moderation had been discarded in favor of what they chillingly termed revolutionary justice, a thinly veiled euphemism for the systematic elimination of anyone deemed a threat to the newly established order. The princess's ultimate test came in August 1792, when revolutionary forces stormed the Tuileries Palace and brutally massacred the Swiss guards who had been valiantly protecting the royal family. The king and queen were summarily arrested and imprisoned in the Temple Tower, while their closest associates were rounded up and detained, awaiting trial before revolutionary tribunals. The Princesse de Lamballe, despite her noble birth and extensive international connections, could have readily claimed diplomatic immunity or sought foreign protection, but she resolutely chose to share the fate of her friends, an act of profound selflessness. On August 19, 1792, the Princesse de Lamballe was formally arrested and taken to La Force prison, one of the most notorious and feared detention facilities in revolutionary Paris. The prison was severely overcrowded, appallingly filthy, and rife with danger, a stark contrast to the opulent and elegant apartments she had known at Versailles. Yet even in these abject and degrading circumstances, the princess steadfastly maintained her dignity and continued to openly express her unwavering loyalty to the royal family, refusing to denounce the monarchy, even when doing so might have spared her life. The conditions at La Force were deliberately designed to be as harsh and demoralizing as possible, intended to break the spirit of political prisoners and coerce them into offering incriminating confessions or denunciations. The princess was confined to a cramped and unsanitary cell with common criminals, deprived of adequate food and basic sanitation, and subjected to constant verbal abuse from guards and fellow prisoners alike. The revolutionaries hoped that these brutal conditions would eventually force her to renounce her royalist beliefs and provide damaging testimony against Marie Antoinette. Despite the immense physical and psychological pressure exerted upon her, the Princesse de Lamballe resolutely refused to compromise her deeply held principles. She spent her days in quiet prayer and deep meditation, drawing strength from her unwavering faith and her firm conviction that she was suffering for a just and righteous cause. Fellow prisoners later testified to her remarkable composure and innate kindness, noting that she selflessly shared what little food she had and offered comfort and support to other inmates who were struggling to cope with their dire circumstances. The princess's unyielding refusal to cooperate with her captors only served to amplify their frustration and anger. Revolutionary officials had initially hoped to exploit her testimony to build a stronger case against Marie Antoinette, but her unwavering loyalty rendered her utterly useless as a witness for the prosecution. Instead, she became a potent symbol of aristocratic defiance, a symbol that needed to be broken to demonstrate the power and unwavering determination of the revolutionary government. As the weeks slowly passed within the confines of La Force prison, the princess must have known, deep down, that her situation was becoming increasingly hopeless. The infamous September Massacres were drawing ever closer, though she could not have possibly foreseen the precise and horrific form that revolutionary vengeance would ultimately take. What she did know with absolute certainty was that her captor's patience was wearing exceedingly thin, and that her continued refusal to denounce the monarchy was effectively sealing her tragic fate. Yet still, she held firm, choosing honor over mere survival in a profound decision that would forever define her enduring legacy. The September Massacres of 1792 represent one of the darkest and most shameful chapters in the history of the French Revolution, a period during which mob violence reached unprecedented levels of brutality, and the last vestiges of civilized justice were completely abandoned. These mass killings were not simply spontaneous outbursts of popular anger, but rather carefully orchestrated campaigns of terror designed to systematically eliminate perceived enemies of the revolution and intimidate anyone who might dare to oppose the new order. The Princesse de Lamballe's gruesome execution stands as perhaps the most shocking and appalling example of the descent into barbarism that characterized this dark period. The massacres commenced on September 2, 1792, following alarming news that enemy armies were rapidly advancing on Paris and fueled by unsubstantiated rumors that imprisoned nobles and priests were plotting to escape and join forces with the invading armies. Radical leaders such as Jean-Paul Marat and Georges Danton skillfully whipped the already fearful population into a frenzy of paranoia and bloodlust, convincing them that extraordinary measures were absolutely necessary to save the revolution from imminent collapse. What followed was a horrific 5-day orgy of systematic slaughter that claimed the lives of over 1,000 innocent victims. The mobs that carried out these unspeakable killings were not composed solely of hardened criminals or marginalized outsiders, but rather of ordinary Parisians, shopkeepers, skilled artisans, common laborers who had been successfully convinced that their precious revolution was in mortal danger. They had been relentlessly told that the prisoners they were brutally murdering were vile traitors who deserved to die, and they approached their grisly task with a distorted sense of patriotic duty. This unsettling ordinariness of evil, this chilling transformation of ordinary neighbors into ruthless executioners, was arguably the most terrifying aspect of the September Massacres. On September 3, 1792, the mob's bloodthirsty attention turned to La Force prison, where the Princesse de Lamballe had been unjustly imprisoned for the previous 2 weeks. Word had rapidly spread throughout the city that the Queen's closest and most trusted friend was being held captive there, and the frenzied crowd had worked itself into a collective fury over her perceived symbolic importance. She represented everything that they despised about the old regime: perceived foreign influence, aristocratic privilege, and unwavering loyalty to the monarchy they were so desperately trying to destroy. The princess was forcibly dragged from her prison cell and brought before a makeshift tribunal that had been hastily assembled in the prison courtyard. This was not a legitimate legal proceeding in any meaningful sense, but rather a grotesque piece of revolutionary theater, cynically designed to provide a superficial veneer of justice to what was, in reality, a barbaric lynching. The so-called judges were simply members of the bloodthirsty mob, drunk on newfound power and fueled by an insatiable bloodlust, who had already irrevocably decided her fate long before she even appeared before them. The tribunal's questions were perfunctory and deliberately designed to trap and incriminate rather than to genuinely enlighten. They demanded that the princess swear a solemn oath denouncing the monarchy and pledging her unwavering loyalty to the newly established republic. They demanded that she publicly condemn Marie Antoinette as an enemy of the people and provide fabricated testimony that could be ruthlessly used in the Queen's inevitable trial. Most importantly, they demanded her complete and utter public submission, her tacit acknowledgement that the old order was dead and that the revolution had definitively triumphed. The Princesse de Lamballe's response was utterly characteristic of the unwavering courage and quiet dignity she had displayed throughout her agonizing ordeal. She calmly but firmly refused to take any oath that would betray her conscience, refusing to swear an oath against the monarchy or to say anything that might harm Marie Antoinette in any way. She acknowledged that she simply could not swear loyalty to principles she did not genuinely believe in, and she expressed her willingness to accept whatever punishment the tribunal might ultimately impose upon her. Her remarkable composure in the face of certain death visibly impressed even some of her most ardent enemies. The mob's reaction to her steadfast refusal was swift, brutal, and utterly savage. They had craved her abject humiliation and complete submission, but her dignified defiance only served to enrage them further. Someone in the seething crowd bellowed, "Death to the friend of Antoinette!" And within mere moments, the princess was being forcibly dragged from the makeshift tribunal toward the prison gates, her fate sealed. What happened next would irrevocably shock even the most hardened revolutionaries who witnessed it firsthand, and would forever remain one of the most horrifying and appalling examples of mob violence in the long and tragic history of humanity. The Princesse de Lamballe was forced to run a gauntlet of frenzied attackers who mercilessly beat her with clubs, sharp stones, and whatever other makeshift weapons they could readily find. Contemporary accounts chillingly describe how she was brutally stripped of her clothing and subjected to horrific acts of sexual violence before finally being murdered in cold blood. Her suffering was deliberately prolonged as the bloodthirsty mob sought to extract the maximum amount of terror and humiliation from her agonizing death. The sheer brutality was not merely incidental to their depraved purpose. It was, in fact, the very purpose itself. The grotesque manner of the princess's death defied every convention of civilized society and deeply shocked horrified observers across Europe. She was not simply killed, but systematically tortured and mutilated, her body violated in ways that were intended to rob her of even the basic dignity of death. The mob's unspeakable actions revealed the unfathomable depths to which human beings can sink when all moral restraints are cast aside and barbaric violence becomes a twisted form of political expression. What made the princess's execution particularly horrifying was not solely its inherent brutality, but its calculated psychological impact on the imprisoned royal family. The revolutionaries were acutely aware that Marie Antoinette would inevitably learn of her friend's brutal fate, and they wanted to ensure that the distraught queen fully understood exactly what awaited anyone who remained stubbornly loyal to the deeply hated monarchy. The princess's horrific death was intended to serve as both a brutal act of revenge and a chilling warning, a stark demonstration of the revolution's absolute power to destroy not only its enemies' lives, but also their very humanity. The most utterly shocking and depraved aspect of Princesse de Lamballe's execution was what transpired after her death. In an act of unprecedented barbarity, the mob decapitated her lifeless corpse and impaled her severed head on a long pike. But this was only the beginning of their macabre and utterly depraved ritual. Contemporary witnesses chillingly described how the bloodthirsty crowd then paraded triumphantly through the streets of Paris, proudly carrying the severed head like a gruesome trophy, while chanting revolutionary songs and celebrating their perceived victory over aristocratic tyranny. The mob's insatiable bloodlust was far from satisfied by the princess's agonizing death. They subjected her already lifeless body to further unspeakable mutilation, cutting it into pieces that were distributed among the gleeful crowd as grotesque and ghoulish souvenirs. Some truly horrific accounts describe how her heart was cut out and eaten by depraved members of the mob, though these particularly gruesome reports may well represent the inevitable mythologizing that often surrounds particularly shocking and traumatic historical events. What is absolutely certain is that her remains were treated with a savagery and utter disrespect that shocked even contemporary observers who had become sadly accustomed to the pervasive violence of the ongoing revolution. The severed head of the Princesse de Lamballe became the gruesome centerpiece of a grotesque procession that wound its way menacingly through the streets of Paris toward the Temple Tower, where Marie Antoinette was being held prisoner. The mob was determined to ensure that the queen saw with her own eyes what had become of her dearest friend, and they took deliberate steps to make the severed head recognizable despite the horrific violence it had endured. Witnesses described how they had crudely styled the princess's hair and applied garish cosmetics to her ravaged face to create a horrifying parody of her former beauty. The procession to the temple was a carefully orchestrated piece of psychological warfare designed to inflict maximum emotional damage. The revolutionaries understood that physical torture alone was woefully insufficient to break their enemies' spirits. They needed to systematically destroy all hope, love, and any vestige of human connection. By brutally forcing Marie Antoinette to confront the mutilated remains of her closest and most trusted friend, they were deliberately attacking not just her fragile body, but also her very soul, seeking to drive her to the brink of madness or utter despair. When the bloodthirsty mob finally reached the Temple Tower, they brazenly demanded that the terrified guards force Marie Antoinette to look out of her window at the princess's severed head. The queen initially and understandably refused, but the crowd's threats became so violent and menacing that she was eventually compelled to witness the horrific spectacle. Contemporary accounts chillingly describe how she immediately fainted upon seeing what had become of her beloved friend, and how the horrifying sight haunted her for the remaining months of her tragic life. The profound psychological impact of this forced viewing cannot be overstated. Marie Antoinette had already endured the devastating loss of her throne, her personal freedom, and her accustomed way of life, but the sight of her friend's mutilated head represented a new and unimaginable level of cruelty that shattered whatever fragile hope she might have still retained. The revolutionaries had succeeded in their ultimate goal of breaking her spirit, demonstrating that they could ruthlessly reach her loved ones, even in death, and subject them to unimaginable degradation. The mob's gruesome celebration continued for many hours after the princess's brutal death, with raucous crowds gathering in taverns and public squares to drink and carouse in obscene honor of their supposed triumph. The severed head was carried from place to place like a depraved totem, with different groups taking turns displaying it and gleefully recounting the gruesome details of the horrific execution. This communal celebration of barbaric violence revealed just how thoroughly the revolution had corrupted normal human emotions, transforming cold-blooded murder into a form of entertainment and unspeakable cruelty into a perverted virtue. The grotesque treatment of the Princesse de Lamballe's remains also reflected the revolutionaries' insidious desire to erase not just their enemies' lives, but their very memory. By callously denying her a proper and respectful burial, and distributing her body parts as obscene trophies, they were attempting to prevent her from becoming a potent martyr or a powerful symbol of resistance. They wanted her death to serve as a chilling warning rather than an inspirational call to arms, a stark demonstration of what inevitably awaited anyone who dared to oppose the revolution. The immediate international reaction to the princess's execution was one of utter horror and profound revulsion. European courts, already deeply alarmed by the revolution's excesses, viewed her death as irrefutable proof that France had descended into complete barbarism. The detailed accounts that rapidly circulated throughout Europe served to harden already negative opinion against the revolutionary government and significantly contributed to the formation of the coalition that would soon wage war against revolutionary France. Even within France itself, many more moderate revolutionaries were deeply shocked and appalled by the sheer brutality of the September Massacres, and particularly by the gruesome treatment of the Princesse de Lamballe. Her execution marked a significant turning point in the revolution, demonstrating that the radical elements were willing to embrace any level of violence, no matter how extreme, in order to achieve their stated goals. This chilling realization would ultimately contribute to the factional struggles that would eventually consume many of the revolution's own leaders, as each competing group sought to desperately prove its revolutionary purity through increasingly extreme acts of gratuitous violence. The aftermath of Princesse de Lamballe's execution revealed the complex ways in which revolutionary violence could both strengthen and weaken the movement that employed it. While the blatant brutality certainly terrorized the revolution's enemies and effectively demonstrated the government's undeniable power, it also horrified potential allies and significantly contributed to the growing international isolation that would plague revolutionary France for many years to come. The princess's tragic death thus became both a potent symbol of revolutionary triumph and a chilling harbinger of the self-destructive tendencies that would eventually lead to the revolution's transformation into the Napoleonic Empire. The execution had immediate and devastating consequences for the royal family imprisoned in the Temple Tower. Marie Antoinette's already fragile mental and physical health deteriorated rapidly after witnessing her friend's brutal death, and she never truly recovered from the profound psychological trauma of that horrific September afternoon. The king, too, was deeply affected by the senseless loss of the princess, whom he had known and respected for many decades. Their innocent children, particularly the young Dauphin, were traumatized by their parents' visible grief and by the chilling knowledge that such unspeakable violence could reach even those closest to them. The revolutionary government's cold and callous treatment of the princess's death was revealing of their broader political strategy and underlying mindset. Rather than expressing even a modicum of regret or attempting to distance themselves in any way from the mob's heinous actions, radical leaders such as the infamous Marat openly celebrated the brutal execution as a necessary act of revolutionary justice. They brazenly argued that the princess's unwavering loyalty to the monarchy made her a traitor to the people, and that her death served as a perfectly appropriate warning to anyone who might even consider opposing the revolution. This official sanction of extreme violence represented a fundamental and irreversible shift in the very character of the revolution. What had initially begun as a movement for genuine political reform and greater social justice had been insidiously transformed into something far darker and more sinister. A ruthless system that justified any level of unspeakable brutality in the ruthless service of its narrow ideological goals. The Princesse de Lamballe's execution thus marked not just the tragic death of an individual, but also the agonizing death of the revolution's original ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The inherent propaganda value of the princess's tragic death was not lost on either side of the sharply divided revolutionary divide. For the radicals, her execution effectively demonstrated their absolute power and unwavering resolve, proving that no enemy of the people, regardless of their status, was beyond their ruthless reach. For the counter-revolutionaries, her martyrdom became a powerful and enduring symbol of the revolution's inherent brutality and utter moral bankruptcy. The sharply competing narratives surrounding her tragic death would continue to shape political discourse in France for many generations to come. The international diplomatic consequences of the execution were both severe and long-lasting, further isolating France from its European neighbors. European monarchs, already deeply alarmed by the revolution's existential threat to traditional royal authority, saw in the princess's brutal death irrefutable proof that no possible accommodation with the revolutionary government was even remotely possible. Her brutal murder, along with that of hundreds of other innocent nobles and clergy during the horrific September Massacres, helped to irrevocably convince foreign powers that military intervention was absolutely necessary to restore order and legitimate government in a chaotic and fractured France. The Princesse de Lamballe's execution also had profound implications for the evolving role of women in revolutionary politics. Her tragic death starkly demonstrated that the revolution's loudly proclaimed ideals of equality did not extend to providing protection from violence, and that women closely associated with the old regime could expect absolutely no mercy from revolutionary justice. This chilling realization would profoundly influence the behavior of other aristocratic women, many of whom wisely chose to flee France rather than risk suffering a similar and gruesome fate. The deliberate psychological warfare aspect of the brutal execution set a dangerous precedent for the revolutionary government's inhumane treatment of political prisoners throughout the ensuing Reign of Terror. The deliberate infliction of psychological torture, the calculated use of loved ones' deaths as weapons against surviving enemies, and the grotesque public celebration of unspeakable violence all became standard tools of revolutionary justice. The princess's tragic death thus significantly contributed to the insidious development of state terrorism as a cynical political strategy. The resulting economic impact of the September Massacres, including the princess's execution, was also extremely significant. The pervasive violence drove away desperately needed foreign investment, severely disrupted vital trade relationships, and contributed to the growing economic isolation that would plague revolutionary France for years to come. The princess's death, as one of the most internationally notorious incidents of the period, played a particularly important role in severely damaging France's overall reputation and long-term economic prospects. The enduring cultural legacy of the Princesse de Lamballe's execution extends far beyond its immediate historical context. Her tragic story has served as the inspiration for countless works of literature, art, and dramatic performance, serving as a powerful symbol of unwavering loyalty, ultimate sacrifice, and the tragic human cost of unchecked political extremism. Writers ranging from Edmund Burke to Stefan Zweig have used her tragic death as a cautionary example of how quickly civilization can collapse into barbarism and how noble human qualities can become fatal weaknesses in times of revolutionary upheaval. The princess's execution has also significantly contributed to the broader development of romantic martyrology, the inherent tendency to idealize the often nameless victims of political violence as pure and noble figures who tragically died for sacred and unimpeachable principles. This romanticization, while undeniably historically inaccurate in many of its specific details, has served important cultural and political functions by providing a compelling counter-narrative to revolutionary propaganda and steadfastly preserving alternative values during extended periods of radical social and political transformation. In the broader context of revolutionary violence, the Princesse de Lamballe's tragic death stands out due to both its inherent brutality and its undeniable symbolic importance. While thousands of people sadly died during the course of the Reign of Terror, her execution captured public attention primarily because it combined extreme and unspeakable violence with a compelling personal story of unwavering friendship and enduring loyalty. Her untimely death thus became a powerful lens through which people could understand and meaningfully process the larger trauma of the ongoing revolutionary upheaval. The historical debate surrounding the princess's execution continues to this very day, with scholars passionately arguing about everything from the specific details of her gruesome death to its broader significance for fully understanding the complex nuances of the French Revolution. Some historians tend to emphasize the underlying political and social factors that made such barbaric violence possible, while others choose to focus on the individual choices and specific character traits that ultimately led to her tragic martyrdom. These ongoing debates reflect the enduring power of her story to provoke strong emotional and intellectual responses, even centuries after the brutal events transpired. The Princesse de Lamballe's execution also raises profound and enduring questions about the inherent nature of political loyalty and the scope of personal obligation in times of profound crisis. Her unwavering decision to remain steadfastly faithful to Marie Antoinette, even unto death, represents a kind of moral absolutism that is both undeniably admirable and potentially tragic. Her story ultimately forces us to carefully consider whether such unwavering loyalty is a virtue to be celebrated or a dangerous rigidity that can ultimately lead to unnecessary suffering. The critically important role of mob psychology in the princess's tragic death has been extensively studied by leading social scientists and historians seeking to fully understand how ordinary people can be so easily transformed into instruments of extreme and senseless violence. Her execution provides a chilling case study in the ways that charged political rhetoric, intense social pressure, and volatile group dynamics can effectively overcome normal moral restraints and ultimately lead to unspeakable atrocities. These profound insights remain acutely relevant for fully understanding the underlying dynamics of political violence in our own tumultuous time. The gendered aspects of the princess's execution have also increasingly attracted scholarly attention, particularly the specific ways in which her treatment reflected deeply ingrained revolutionary attitudes toward aristocratic women and traditional feminine virtue. The sexual violence that chillingly accompanied her brutal murder, the grotesque mutilation of her lifeless body, and the public display of her defiled remains all strongly suggest that her gender undeniably played a significant role in determining the specific form that her gruesome punishment ultimately took. The religious dimensions of the princess's tragic story, her deep and abiding Catholic faith, her willing acceptance of prolonged suffering, and her unwavering forgiveness of her tormentors have made her a figure of veneration in some religious circles and a powerful symbol of Christian martyrdom. Her death has been often interpreted as a sacrifice made for both her unwavering faith and her enduring friendship, adding yet another layer to her already incredibly complex and multifaceted legacy. The international law implications of the princess's execution were also highly significant, as her status as a foreign-born noble raised troubling questions about diplomatic immunity and the appropriate protection of non-combatants during times of acute political upheaval. Her tragic death contributed to the gradual development of international norms regarding the humane treatment of political refugees and the legal obligations of host countries to diligently protect foreign nationals residing within their borders. The inherent relationship between the Princesse de Lamballe's brutal execution and the broader trajectory of the French Revolution remains a hotly contested subject of ongoing historical debate. Some respected scholars passionately argue that her death marked a crucial turning point, a moment after which the revolution's violent excesses became all but inevitable. Others strongly contend that the horrific September Massacres, including her shocking execution, were essentially historical aberrations that do not accurately reflect the revolution's true character or its undeniably positive ultimate achievements. The popular memory of the princess's tragic execution has been greatly shaped by shifting political circumstances and evolving cultural values over the centuries since her death. During the subsequent Restoration period, she was rightly celebrated as a selfless martyr to royal loyalty and traditional values. In the later Republican era, her deeply unsettling story was often conveniently ignored or deliberately downplayed as an embarrassing reminder of the revolution's undeniable excesses. In our own time, she has been rightfully rediscovered as a powerful symbol of fundamental human rights and individual conscience. The Princesse de Lamballe's tragic story challenges us to think deeply about the often staggering costs of profound political transformation and the true price of maintaining our own personal integrity during times of acute crisis. Her brutal execution serves as a chilling reminder that history's grand narratives of progress and liberation often come at an enormous human cost, and that the tragic victims of political violence are not simply cold statistics, but real human beings with complex lives, deeply meaningful relationships, and complex motivations. As we solemnly reflect on the horrifying death of Princesse de Lamballe, we are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about the inherent nature of human nature and the ever-present dangers of unchecked political extremism that remain acutely relevant in our modern world. Her execution serves as a stark and sobering reminder that civilization itself is inherently fragile, that moral progress is by no means inevitable, and that ordinary people are often capable of extraordinary cruelty when the right unfortunate circumstances tragically align. Yet, her timeless story also poignantly demonstrates the enduring power of unwavering loyalty, steadfast courage, and fundamental human dignity to endure even in the face of unspeakable brutality. The Princesse de Lamballe ultimately died as she had always lived, faithful to her deeply held principles and steadfastly devoted to those she truly loved, In an age that prized revolutionary virtue above all else, she bravely chose personal loyalty over easy political correctness, enduring friendship over mere personal safety, and profound honor over fleeting life itself. Her execution stands as one of the most shocking and appalling examples of mob violence in all of human history, but it also serves as a powerful testament to the remarkable human capacity for selfless sacrifice and enduring moral courage. Her tragic death forces us to grapple with the inherent tension between abstract political justice and concrete personal morality, between the perceived necessities of collective action and the inviolable dictates of individual conscience. In bravely choosing unwavering loyalty over her own mere survival, the princess affirmed timeless values that transcend political movements and specific historical moments: enduring love, steadfast friendship, and an unwavering fidelity to one's deepest convictions. These are not simply historical curiosities, but living and breathing principles that continue to both challenge and profoundly inspire us today. The unspeakable horror of what happened to Princesse de Lamballe on that dark September day in 1792 should never be forgotten. Not because we should needlessly dwell on humanity's capacity for unspeakable cruelty, but because we must always remember the potential cost of abandoning our precious moral restraints and the inestimable value of the fragile civilization we too often take for granted. Her tragic story is ultimately not just about the distant past, but about the eternal and ongoing struggle between barbarism and civilization, between corrosive hatred and enduring love, and between paralyzing fear and ennobling courage. In the end, the Princesse de Lamballe's brutal execution tells us something both profound and enduring about both the darkest depths of human nature and the brightest heights of the human spirit. While it poignantly reveals the depths to which ordinary people can tragically sink. So, as we've seen, the story of the Princesse de Lamballe is far more than just a gruesome tale from the French Revolution. It's a powerful, albeit heartbreaking, exploration of loyalty, sacrifice, and the fragility of humanity in the face of unchecked rage. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, the light of courage and unwavering devotion can shine brightly, challenging us to hold fast to our own principles, even when it comes at a great personal cost. It's a story that lingers, forcing us to confront the darkness within ourselves and to appreciate the preciousness of the values we often take for granted. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What struck you most about the Princesse de Lamballe's story? Did it change your perspective on the French Revolution or the nature of loyalty itself? Please leave a comment down below. I'm really keen to read your insights and discuss this further with you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. And if you found this exploration compelling, please consider subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss any future deep dives into fascinating historical figures and events. Thanks so much for watching.